Lecture 2, Part 3, The Meaning of Everything, or Brahman. The second of the two big questions of the Upanishads, the ultimate question in metaphysics, concerns the source of all reality, both the physical universe and all mental phenomena, both all mental states and all mental subjects, thoughts and thinkers. Unsurprisingly, as a religion, Hinduism posits a single sacred, eternal, and omnipotent agency behind all reality, which the Upanishads refers to as Brahman. The term Brahman translates most literally as ultimate reality, but there really is no perfect translation of it. In many respects, the Vedic Brahman resembles the monotheistic conception of God. Both exhibit key qualities which scholars of religion associate with the conception of the sacred. They are each considered uniquely distinctive or set apart, beyond human control, essential to enduring human happiness within and beyond this lifetime, and determinative of all value, in that a meaningful life must be directed towards it. Moreover, both are considered eternal and the source of the universe and everything within it. And God and Brahman are also both conceived of as omnipresent, and the creator and sustainer of the universe. In Christian theological terms, the universe is claimed to have come into existence, but also to subsist, that is, to continue to exist, through God's grace. Perhaps the major contrast is that while the Western concept of God is personal, that is, God is conceived of as an individual person, a mind, a being, an agent, predominantly within the Upanishads, Brahman is not. Brahman is the impersonal ground of all things. However, there's ambiguity in the Upanishads here, since it frequently employs personal pronouns, he and his, in reference to Brahman. In post-Upanishads Hindu philosophy, Brahman is seen as the underlying ground, the trimurti, of the three principal Hindu deities: Brahma, the creator; Vishnu, the preserver; and Shiva, the destroyer. Much as the medieval Christian concept of the Godhead was seen as the unitive ground for the Holy Trinity, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But the major distinction between these two sacred grounds of all reality is that within monotheistic traditions, God is seen as transcendent, that is, separate from everything else. There's the creator and creation, heaven and earth, two separate realms. While the Upanishads insist that Brahman is immanent within the universe, or more accurately, the universe is immanent within Brahman. Brahman is not separate from the universe. Brahman is the universe, conceived of as a single, unified, eternal, and enduring totality. Or expressed differently, Brahman is the unified ground or undifferentiated field out of which the apparent multiplicity of distinct individual objects and subjects forms. According to the Chandogya Upanishads, verily all is Brahman. As by knowing one lump of clay, dear one, we come to know all things are made out of clay, that they differ only in name and form, while the stuff of which they are all made is clay. So through spiritual wisdom, dear one, we come to know all is one. All is Brahman. Pantheism and the problem of existence and meaning of the sacred. Monotheistic theology, from Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, faces a challenge of proving God's existence because of its adherence to this transcendent conception of God. Since all our experiences are limited to this universe, any claim committed to the existence of something beyond or outside the universe is going to be difficult to establish. Alternatively, philosophers that adhere to a pantheistic conception of the sacred, like the writers of the Upanishads, generally don't spend time attempting to prove the existence of the sacred. In fact, when asked where Brahman is, several of the Upanishads simply give a list of readily observable objects. For example, Brahman is fire, Brahman is water, Brahman is the mountains, Brahman is fish, birds, people. Each individual thing is 1 foot of Brahman. If pressed for proof, a Hindu sage may simply point to anything and say, over there, that is Brahman. Over here, that is Brahman. There. Do you want me to continue? Note this method of proof connects with the common phrase of the Upanishads, Tat Tam Asi, which translates as, thou art that, where thou can refer to either Brahman or oneself, or Atman, and that can refer to anything or any phenomena whatsoever. Tat Tam Asi. Thou art that. But pantheists face their own fundamental theological challenge concerning the sacred. They don't have to prove the existence of the sacred, at least they don't struggle to prove it. But they do have a problem of meaning. What exactly does it mean to refer to everything as sacred? We've seen that an essential element of the concept of the sacred means that it's special or distinct or set apart. For example, holidays are special days set apart from ordinary days, and holy sites are special places requiring one to act with reverence, or at least respect, when they're entered. But given this, it seems then that something can only be classified as sacred if some other things are simultaneously classified as mundane. Hence it seems if everything is sacred, then nothing is. That's the problem. Since if everything is sacred, then there's nothing left to be mundane, nothing left to be ordinary. And hence, nothing from which the sacred can be set apart. Consider my mom's special dinnerware, which she keeps in a glass china cabinet and only brings out on special occasions. We have our everyday dishes and the special dishes, but they are dependent on each other. The special dishes wouldn't be special if they weren't set apart from our everyday dishes. Here's another example of how a lack of contrast can lead to a lack of meaning. Consider when someone over-highlights a textbook. In trying to highlight everything, you end up not highlighting anything, since highlighting essentially requires making something stand out against a background, which remains unhighlighted. The meaning of highlighting depends on an opposite or a correlative, the unhighlighted. When you highlight everything, you remove this contrasting correlative and defeat the whole purpose of highlighting. Similarly, the notion of the sacred depends on the correlative ordinary or mundane. Hence, I refer to this objection as the fallacy of the suppressed correlative. Here's the objection in standard form. Premise 1. Under pantheism, everything is sacred. Premise 2. If everything's sacred, then there's nothing that the sacred can be set apart from or contrasted with. Premise 3. If there is nothing the sacred can be set apart from, then the concept of the sacred is meaningless. Therefore, under pantheism, the concept of the sacred is meaningless. The famous astronomer Carl Sagan put the problem like this, quote, "If by God one means the set of physical laws that govern the universe, then there clearly is such a God. But this God is emotionally unsatisfying. It doesn't make much sense to pray to the law of gravity." And the eminent biologist and critic of religion, Richard Dawkins, went even further to claim pantheism is merely sexed up atheism. Take a second here to see what do you think. How might pantheists respond to this argument? Which premise might they reject? One response is to deny premise 2. By setting apart the point of view of the universe as sacred from the point of view of the universe as mundane, or as a set of distinct individual substances. Enlightenment, i.e., the perception of the universe as sacred, is set apart from the ordinary perception of it. In fact, this response is exactly in line with the view of that spiritual salvation involves coming to a certain enlightened understanding or vision of the world, and not maintaining faith in any set of religious claims regarding God or a life after death. In this sense, the enlightened pantheist perceives the same universe as the rest of us, but through a different conceptual filter. This fits the view of the famous German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who insisted that our perception is always mediated by concepts. Psychologists confirm this phenomena with ambiguous illustrations like the duck rabbit. Here you need to see a picture of the duck rabbit. Google duck rabbit, or take a look. I've got a picture of one in the written essay lecture that corresponds to this audio. According to many pantheistic traditions, including Vedantic Hinduism, the purpose of religion is to bring about an alteration in the way one perceives the universe, to bring one to the state of enlightenment, where one directly perceives the universe as sacred. As you can imagine, this enlightened perception of the universe as sacred has a transformative effect on the individual, including both psychologically and morally. Hence, according to the Isha Upanishad, quote, "He who sees all beings in the self, and the self in all being hates none. To the illuminated soul, the self is all. For him who sees everywhere oneness, how can there be delusion or grief?" So what's this contrasting view of perceptions due to Sagan's worry about prayer under pantheism being emotionally unsatisfying? Sagan seems to be arguing, 1, under pantheism, prayer is meaningless. 2, any view of the sacred under which prayer is meaningless is emotionally unsatisfying. So therefore, pantheism is emotionally unsatisfying. Again, what do you think? How might a pantheist respond to this argument? Sagan might be right that petitionary prayer, like asking for God for favors, may be meaningless under pantheism. But petition is not the only motivation for or purpose of prayer. Prayer can also be expressive of awe or reverence, or a form of meditation or relaxation. And these senses of prayer or meditation are consistent with pantheism. The fundamental truth of the Upanishads. According to the Upanishads, the enlightened individuals not only perceive all things as sacred, but perceive all things as essentially interconnected and unified parts of a single sacred reality, Brahman. Brahman is perceived to be a single, unitary, unchanging, eternal ground out of which all things flow and into which all things dissolve. And if an epistemological skeptic like David Hume asked the enlightened sage how he knows this, the sage would reply as a true empiricist, because I directly perceive it. Moreover, this perception required years of training and discipline to acquire, and it in principle is available to anyone willing to put in the requisite effort. Again, we'll consider the credibility of this type of evidence derived from meditative states in a coming lecture. For now, here's one more analogy. This shift in perception, emphasized in the Upanishads, from the view of all things as separate individual entities to the view of everything as fundamentally interconnected through Brahman, is remarkably similar to views of the largest living organism in the world. Do you know what it is? It's not a blue whale or a giant sequoia tree. Take a second. Think about it. The largest living organism in the world. It's a mushroom. More precisely, it's a field of mushrooms in Oregon. On the surface, this field looks like thousands of separate mushrooms. But below the ground, all these mushrooms can be seen to share the same root system. And from this point of view, it becomes apparent that they are, in fact, parts of a single plant, a single living organism. This fact of Brahman, that Brahman is everything, raises one last issue, at least for this lecture. If Brahman is a singular, all-encompassing unity and is the sole ultimate reality, what becomes of Atman? The Upanishads have an unflinching answer, which is regarded as the fundamental truth of the Upanishads. Atman is Brahman. Again, this is the fundamental truth of the Upanishads. The goal of the individual's spiritual practice is to come to this realization, to perceive directly that you are Brahman. You are the universe made aware of itself. Okay, if everything's Brahman, then I'm Brahman. Saying this is one thing. Directly perceiving it is something else altogether. Something we can imagine is much more intense and dramatic. But what does this do to the problem of personal identity? Indeed, what's it do to the notion of individuality? Apparently, it would turn it on its head. According to the Upanishads, then, there are no individuals. There's only Brahman. But then it seems that the notion of personal identity would disappear, since Brahman can't be the foundation for every individual's personal identity. If we're all Brahman, Brahman doesn't serve to uniquely identify me across time, or to differentiate me from you or anyone else. How many Atman are there anyway? When I was discussing Atman and personal identity in the previous part of this lecture, it seems that the Upanishads were committed to claim that each individual was a unique Atman, just as Descartes contended that each individual is a unique mind. And Christianity affirms the existence of a plurality of individual souls. But if all Atman are Brahman, and there's only one Brahman, then it would seem there is, in fact, only one Atman. So again, what then are we to make of individuality? Perhaps unsurprisingly, there's no unanimity among Hindu philosophers on this point. One possibility is that there are multiple individual Atman, which are all part of Brahman. Here, Brahman would need to be seen as something like a large, complex system. But this answer doesn't fit well with the description of Brahman as simple and unchanging. Instead, the Upanishads seem to describe a network of levels of reality, where the lower level, while not unreal, is somehow less real than the higher level. In the lower realm or level, there are individual persons who persist through time. But at a deep level, there's only the unified field of Brahman. Cooperman explains this levels of reality view with the example of a physical table, which from a macro level of everyday perception is a single solid object. But from the micro level of subatomic physics, it's revealed to be mostly empty space, with millions of individual particles making it up. Contemporary physics has an answer to why objects like tables seem solid and singular when they're not. In the next lecture, we'll consider if there is a parallel account for why Brahman seems differentiated into physical, distinct individual objects. Another metaphor I like here is that of an individual with multiple personality disorder. Individuals with multiple personalities suggest that separate individual personalities are Atmans, perhaps. That plural is not really used in the Upanishads, can be seen as subsisting within a single substance or subject. Atman, or one's true self, which is identical with Brahman. Finally, I want to note that this Upanishad conception of a deep unity that lies underneath the everyday world of individuality and differentiation was a major influence on many Western thinkers who read the Upanishads, including, for example, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote a famous essay, The Oversoul. This term derives from the Sanskrit Param Atman, or Supreme Soul. It's conceived of as the single collective soul which unifies all individual things and souls. Here's an excerpt from Emerson's essay. We live in succession, in division, in parts, in particles. Meantime, within man is the soul of the whole, the wise silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. And this deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is all accessible to us is not only self-sufficing and perfect in every hour, but the act of seeing and the thing seen, the seer and the spectacle, the subject and the object are all one. We see the world piece by piece as the sun, the moon, the animal, the tree, but the whole, of which these are all shining parts, is the soul, the oversoul. Emerson's essay, and any of the philosophers mentioned in this lecture, would make for an excellent reference, comparison, and or illustration for a term paper or presentation. It's not too early to start thinking about it.